let's talk about how to classify bones by shape. Let's fill in some blanks here, and then, cords are getting in the way. And then I'm going to show you the picture. So, depending on the shape of the bone, it's going to have different proportions of how much is compact and how much is spongy bone. So let's see what we have. Most common things when we think of bones, we're going to think of long bones. So long bones, that's going to be the humerus, that's the upper part of the arm. They're going to have the bone shaft, and it's going to have two ends. It is spongy bone in the middle, surrounded by the compact bone. This is going to be all the bones in all of the limbs. That would be the arms and the legs, except for your kneecap, the patella. Those are all considered long bones. You also have short bones. This is what you're going to find in the wrist. So the carpals of the wrist, there's 7 of them. They look a lot like cubes. They are almost exclusively spongy, but they do have a thin layer of the compact bone around them, and that's going to help provide that support. Short bones are also the sesamoid bones, which are very small, and they're in the tendons like the patella. We'll talk more about those when we get to the actual skeleton in chapter 8. Next unit, not this one. All right, so we have long and short. Then we also have flat, so flat bones. This would be like your parietal bone in the skull. Your ribs are also considered flat bones. They are thin, so they're not particularly very big. They're flat, imagine that. And then they usually have some sort of curve. They are spongy bone that is between 2 layers of the compact bone. And then you also have everything else, which is called irregular. Your vertebrae tend to fit in this category very well. They have very strange shapes that are often complicated, almost exclusively spongy bone with a few layers of the compact bone around there just to provide the protection and the support there of the marrow. So before you turn the page, on page 215 in your textbook, as I get it pulled up, here are the types of bones here. So starting at the top of the head, so this is the frontal bone right here. It is a flat bone, right there, the whole part of the head. Classic long bone, this here, the femur. So it's 2 ends, long shaft there, 2 ends. Same thing if you look up here in the humerus, the arm. There's the radius, there's the ulna. Again, real long shafts, 2 ends at the joints. Short bones, this here is going to be pointing at the foot. So these are the tarsals in the foot. So here they look like little cubes. Same thing in the wrist. If you look up here, looking real close, there's just a bunch of cubes that are positioned there together. Irregular bones, this over here, there's the glare. All right, better. This is a vertebrae from the spinal column. This doesn't look like anything in particular, so it's just irregular. So those are our types of bones. So far, so good. Now, let's talk about bone structure. There we go. All right, bone structure. What do they look like? Gross anatomy. We're not going to be dissecting bones. You do not have to take a gross anatomy class unless you go to medical school. All right, so in a long bone. So typically you're going to have, now again, I'm going to talk about these and then I'm going to show you a picture. So let's talk about long bones and then we'll look at a picture of it. you're going to have what is called the diaphysis, diaphysis. This is the shaft, which has the compact bone, and it surrounds what is known as the medullary or medullary, I say medullary, based on the word medulla, meaning middle, cavity of yellow bone marrow. Yellow bone marrow is fat, contains fat. Red bone marrow is what makes blood. So the diaphysis shaft of the compact bone. Next, the bone ends. This is the epiphysis. Epiphysis, epiphysis. These are the bone ends, and so these are usually going to kind of flare out, and the inside of them is going to be spongy bone. They're going to have compact bone. They're not going to generally have a lot of marrow in them, particularly there. So you have your diaphysis, your epiphysis, and then you have the epiphyseal line, L-I-N-E. Epiphyseal, E-P-I-P-H-Y-S-E-A-L, epiphyseal line. This is what it looks like in an adult, and that's going to be the remnant of this growth plate. And what that represents is the cartilage, where the cartilage is grown, that joins your epiphysis with your diaphysis. So it joins the middle, the shaft, with the ends. That is called the epiphyseal line. And in an adult, that's what they'll say when you see this line. They'll say, oh, the growth plate is closed. If there's not a line and the growth plate is still there, then they can still grow tall or grow longer. Next, you have what is known as the periosteum, P-E-R-I-O-S-T-E-U-M, periosteum. It is a double membrane that covers the diaphysis. So that would be the shaft there. The outer fibrous layer is dense, irregular connective tissue, so still connective tissue. And then here on the inside, let's get this up a little bit. On the inside, you're going to have your osteogenic layer. Now, there's two cells that are in here. They differ by one letter, so be careful when you see these. Okay, the ones that form bone, these are called osteoblasts, B-L-A-S-T-S, osteoblasts. Form bone. You remember that osteoblasts, those are the ones you say they are bone builders. Bone builders. Osteoblasts are bone builders. Now, you also have osteoclasts, C-L-A-S-T-S. So again, one letter, whether it's a B or a C. Osteoclasts are bone destroying. Both of these have a function. We'll talk about that. You talk about it a lot more in A&P2, but we'll talk about it a little bit here. These are bone destroying. You remember that the C, those are called bone crumblers. I don't like to say bone crushers because they don't really crush, but they do crumble things. You also have a nutrient foramen. Foramen is a fancy health word for opening. So these are openings within the bone as you go around where you have nerves, blood, lymph vessels, because bone is living tissue. So it does need nutrients, so that's how it gets them. You have also what is known as perforating fibers. And these are collagen, and they secure the periosteum, so this double membrane, to the bone. And then they also serve as attachment points for the tendons and the ligaments. So these are going to be like bone markings that we will talk about next unit. This is where we get our bone markings. Next, Almost done. 2 more of these. You have the endosteum, endosteum. This is also connective tissue, but it is very delicate, it's very sensitive, and it covers the internal bone surface. It also has osteoblasts and osteoclasts. So the periosteum on the outside of the bone and the endosteum on the inside of the bone surfaces also has these bone builders, bone crumblers. And so that's over the little framework, the bone network. F and G. F says perforating fibers, and G is endosteum. endosteum. It's a good question. All right. And then it'll be in the canals of the compact bone. Last one here. You have articular cartilage. Cartilage, L-A-G. And this covers, so your periosteum covered the diaphysis, so that would be the shaft. The articular cartilage is what covers your epiphyseal surfaces, so the ends. So this is what articular cartilage covers, the ends of the bones, ends of the long bones. So that was a whole lot of words. Let's see here. 7.4, where's figure 7.3? Here we go. All right. Gross anatomy of a long bone. Here it is. This is on page 216 if you have your book or your e-text. So here is this is our long bone. This is a humerus, so it's in the arm. This is your upper arm. This is what I have a picture of on a t-shirt. So the first thing we talked about was the diaphysis. So that would be this whole long shaft here. This whole long shaft. Now, you also have the epiphysis. That would be each end. So here is one epiphysis. Proximal, meaning further away. No, closer to the trunk, sorry, closer to the trunk. So this is the one this is going to be like what's in the shoulder. And you have your distal epiphysis, so that's going to be the end of the bone down here. This is going to be what's further away from the trunk. Next, here you have, this is the epiphyseal line. So in this person, this is an adult. It's just a line, so this was where growth was occurring. Here is the difference. This is all spongy bone through here where there's little holes. And so this is the trabeculae there, just that mesh network that looks like a sponge. You don't wash your car with it though. The compact bone, that would be this thin layer right around everything. It's very heavy, very dense. There's a spongy bone in the middle. Now, the medullary cavity, that would be this open portion of the bone in here, and it's going to have fat or yellow bone marrow in the adult. Let's see. The periosteum, that would be this part down here. So within the periosteum, you have, there's a bone cell right there. There's the cells there. Here are your perforating fibers there. This here, this is your cellular layer. This is your osteoblasts and your osteoclasts in the cell. This is what holds it. These perforating fibers connects it to the bone. Now, what else have I not pointed out? The endosteum. The endosteum, that's this up here. All around here. This covers the internal bone surfaces. So here is your medullary cavity. So then this is what lines these trabeculae there. You've got, there's a bone cell, osteocytes. Here's your osteoblasts, osteoclasts, right around in there. So that's the endosteum. I didn't talk about the nutrients. Here's the nutrient. There's a little hole there where nutrient arteries can come in. There's a few up here too. There we go, up here, moving through. What else do we have? Articular cartilage. This is on the end. So you can see the articular cartilage ends here, and the rest of this becomes periosteum. That continues all the way down periosteum until you get to the end, and here's more articular cartilage. The rest of this is covered with periosteum. All right, I think that covered all of those. Great. That was on page 216. Next, short, irregular, and flat bones. This is a lot shorter. This next section here. You scoot this up where you can see it. Great. So there's only two things. You have your internal spongy bone, which is a diploe, which is fun to say, and it does have an endosteum. Again, picture coming soon. And then on the external portion of short bones, irregular, and flat bones, you have thin layers of compact bone, and that's surrounded by the periosteum. This is what's going to give it structure. So let's look at what this is going to look like. Here it is, page 217, figure 7.4. So this is a flat bone in the skull. Here you have your spongy bone. If you zoom in over here, this is what it looks like. It looks like a sponge that you would use to wash your car, but you don't have to. So here, diploe, I don't know who decided if we should call it yet another name, but they did. So we should have another name for it. So that's diploe, spongy bone, perfectly okay with me. So now, covering that, you have your compact bones. So see this real thin layer, compact bone, always covered with a periosteum. Here, your spongy bone, this is all endosteum in between it. So there's connective tissue all around, lots of connective tissue in the bones. All right, so that was figure 7.4, page 217, if you want to look at it. Next, hematopoietic tissue. Wow, that's an awful word to have to say. Scoot this over where you can see it. Hematopoietic, or poietic if you prefer, tissue. We call that red bone marrow. You can say red marrow, but red bone marrow. Remember that, it's on every single test in A&P2, red bone marrow. So in an infant and a small child, red bone marrow is found in the medullary cavity and all of the spongy bone. You're going to have red bone marrow. In adults, it would be in the spongy bone portions that are in the epiphysis, so the ends of the long bones. So in an adult, you are only going to have red bone marrow in your humerus. We have two of them, one in each arm, and in the femur, each leg, femur, in the long bones. Now, it will be in the red marrow of the flat bones. So you still have some in the flat bones. So that would be like in the sternum and in the skull, in the sternum and in the skull. And then in the red marrow of some of your irregular bones. Most commonly, we're not in the vertebrae, but here in the hips. So you actually have to have a lot of space for this to happen. So those ends of the long bones, space between the sternum and the skull, the hip bones. There, let's look at it. All right, so this is an adult, figure 7.5 on page 218. Here is an adult. All right. Anywhere that is pink in this figure has red bone marrow. So here's your portion of the humerus up here, so right in the shoulders. Flat bones, here's the ribs, the sternum a little bit. We do have some in the vertebrae, but up there in the skull, and then here in the pelvis, the redder, the better it is. So this is a cross section from the head of the femur where it connects to the hip. This looks like yellow bone marrow. It doesn't really look that yellow, but if you look close and use your imagination. And then here's red within the sponge part is what that looks like. So red bone marrow looks very red. Yellow, I don't think it looks that yellow, but maybe a little bit, maybe more orange perhaps would be a better way of describing it, but I didn't name it. They didn't ask me to name it. All right, so that's where we find bone marrow. All right, chemical compositions. Well, so what is bone made out of? That's what this is asking. What do we make bone out of? Well, we have living cells because bone is a tissue. And again, we're going to talk about them and then I'm going to show you a picture. So the living cells, you have osteoblasts. These are the ones that are bone builders. Bone builders. You have your osteocytes. We talked about those already. So those are going to be your mature bone cells. They're the ones that are in the lacunae and such. And then you also have your osteoclasts. Those are the bone crumblers. Bone crumblers. Now, those are the living cells. Within the organic component, you also have osteoids, so that's bone-like. So these are organic components that are in the matrix. Remember, connective tissue always has a matrix. And it comes from osteoblasts. Osteoid comes from osteoblasts, so write that out here. Osteoblasts make osteoid. You can't see that. Osteoblasts make osteoid. Now, it helps make the bone strong, but it is also flexible, but helps resist stretching and twisting. It is made of collagen fibers and it is made of glycoproteins. All right, so those are the things that are living or organic. Inorganic, so not alive, not carbon-based. This is what is going to make the bone hard and very durable, resisting compression. Minerals. Minerals are going to almost exclusively be calcium phosphate. Calcium phosphate salts. Pretty much made of calcium phosphate. All right, there's a few others, but primarily. All right, so now let's look at these. Here I'm on page 219, figure 7.6. So what you have here is the life cycle of a bone cell. You start with osteoprogenitor or progenitor cells. Those become osteoblasts, bone builders. This is what makes the matrix. As those grow older and mature, they become the osteocyte, and that's what its job is, to maintain the bone matrix. And then we don't have really much picture in the way of the osteoblast, osteoclast, pictures there, but those are our three components making the matrix. All right, moving on. Turn the page, page 3. There's only 5 pages of this, so we're almost done. Y'all are awesome. Okay. So, compact bone. Hey, we've already seen this. You've already done this. This was on the last test, and y'all did awesome on it. All right, so the basic unit of compact bone, let me scoot that down a little bit, is called an osteon, or you can call it a Haversian system. That is your structural unit. An osteon is not a cell, it is a region. An osteon is a region. Now, you also have the lamellae. These are the compact tubes that have collagen fibers. They make things strong. You have the central canal. That's in the middle. And it's where the blood vessels and the nerves come in. On the test, you may have called it a Haversian canal, but it doesn't matter. If that was the guy who discovered them, good for him. Next, you have perforating canals. These are the ones that go perpendicular, meaning at a 90-degree angle, so like this, to the central canals, and they connect the periosteum with the medulla of the bone. Next, we're going to draw a picture and we're going to look at a picture too. You have osteocytes. These are going to be your mature bone cells. Osteocytes, mature bone cells. And they're in the little caves called lacunae. So those are the small cavity little caves where they live. And these osteocytes are connected to each other and to everything else. So they can get their nutrients by the little canals. We call them canaliculi. Canaliculi. That's a fun word to say. All right, so if we look at bone, we've got our big area here in the middle, and then we have several rings. Remember, bone looks a lot like a tree if you were to open up a tree trunk. All right, so there's several rings there. All right, so within our rings, all right, so this whole unit here, this whole functional unit is the osteon. Haversian system, if you prefer. Next, this big thing here in the middle, that is the central canal. It's going to look better on the picture that I show you, but it does me good to help draw it. Now, each one of these rings here, this ring is a lamella. So plural would be lamellae. These are the little tubes, layers, tree rings. Now, within here, you're going to have your little osteocyte in its cave. They're just kind of hidden around everywhere, kind of interspersed. So here we'll say this is an osteocyte. Site means cell. And that's in its lacuna cave. And then here's your central canal. So we need something that is going to be perpendicular to it. So it's running up and down. So you're going to have something that looks kind of like this that goes perpendicular to it. And we're going to call that the perforating canal. Very good. And lastly, these little lines that kind of connect these cells to each other, tiny lines, those are the canaliculi. They connect the canals to the cells and the cells to each other. So if you hate my drawing, I don't blame you. This one's better. Page 221. Figure 7.7. So here you have your system here. Here's your central canal. It has arteries, veins, and nerves that go in there. Each one of these rings, that's a lamella, so all three of them together, lamellae. Here, there's your osteocyte. these little outpourings and canals where it connects to each other and talks to each other, canaliculi. So the whole functional unit is the osteon. Looks better. Much better than my drawing. Now, in spongy bone, you have your irregular shaped lamellae and then your osteocytes. They're all interconnected with their canaliculi, which is such a fun word to say. I just love it so much. Canaliculi right there. And how in the world are they arranged? They are arranged in a way that is going to provide the strongest arrangement with the least amount of mass or weight. So the goal here is to keep the skeleton light. So not too heavy, not as light as birds, because birds can fly, but if everything was made of compact bone, we would be much, much heavier and much more difficult to move. So here we go. Here's the spongy bone, also figure 7.7, but now we're going to go down here and look at this area. So here's your trabeculae. So here it's just a web. What did what say? It's the strongest arrangement with the least mass or weight is how the trabeculae are arranged in spongy bone. So it's going to be random to provide. So right here, this webbing, this is all spongy bone, is going to provide a lot of support with not much mass or weight. So here, endosteum, there's your osteocyte, still in lacuna. The canaliculi are open at the surface so that they can connect to everything else. Hopefully that makes somewhat sense. If not, I understand. All right. Let's switch gears.